Ah, oh, I thought you were a customer. I should have known better. However, every disappointment has its bright side. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Ernst Lubitsch, our director. The man who gave you a Garbo in Ninochka who made you laugh, and who now gives you a Morgan who makes you laugh.
I hope.
Yes, I hope so too, in The Shop Around the Corner.
During the 1960s, visitors to the Beverly Hills offices of the writer-director Billy Wilder would see on display not only his collection of Oscars, received for the likes of Sunset Boulevard and The Apartment, but also hanging on one of the walls a large plaque inscribed with a simple 5-word dictum. How would Lubitsch do it? The plaque was Wilder's tip of the hat to his cinematic idol, mentor, and the man who gave him his first big break in Hollywood. But so too was it reflective of the high regard in which Lubitsch was held, both by his contemporaries and the countless number of filmmakers since who have been influenced by his signature cinematic style and the famous Lubitsch touch. Born in Berlin in 1892, the young Lubitsch first worked in his father's tailoring shop, but his desire to become an actor led to him auditioning for and joining the Deutsches Theater in 1911 under the tutelage of legendary stage producer Max Reinhardt. Films quickly followed, and while continuing to tread the boards for Reinhardt, the small-statured, rather odd-looking Lubitsch began to craft for himself a distinctive, gargoyle-like comedy screen persona. By 1917, he had already directed a small number of single-reel films, but it would be the new opportunities opened up by the formation of the UFA studio in 1917 which would give Lubitsch his breakthroughs behind the camera, and in the following 5 years, he would move from directing frothy two-reel farces about sexual politics to expansive, large-scale historical dramas. Lubitsch's ability to combine comedy and spectacle caught the eye of Mary Pickford, who, in 1922, invited him to America to direct her production of Rosita. Settling in Hollywood, he went on to direct a number of defining classics of the silent era, including his landmark adaptation of Oscar Wilde's Lady Windermere's Fan. The advent of sound was enough to kill off many a silent director's career, but Lubitsch instead adapted to the new technological development. With films such as The Love Parade and The Smiling Lieutenant, he transformed the movie musical, graduating it from its awkward vaudevillian roots into a cinematic art form in its own right, as well as making screen stars of the likes of Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald. Sound also enabled Lubitsch to begin to develop what would become the trademark verbal wit of his later films. Throughout the 1930s, alongside Frank Capra, Gregory LaCava and Howard Hawks, Lubitsch would become one of the key progenitors of the screwball comedy, in which the battle of the sexes would be fought out amidst farcical situations, scored by a hailstorm of fast-paced repartee and suggestive double entendres, aided by razor-sharp scripts from screenwriters such as Samson Raphaelson and Billy Wilder. A Lubitsch film, however, felt different to those of his American contemporaries. His stories would frequently be taken from obscure European sources, and, though usually starring American actors, they would often take place in exoticized and very often apocryphal European settings, a la the Fredonia of the Marx Brothers' Duck Soup. This evocative Lubitsch land only added to the sense of sophistication for domestic American audiences. The Shop Around the Corner, released in 1940, a year after the runaway success of the Greta Garbo vehicle Ninochka, is, in many ways, the quintessential Lubitsch comedy. Once again, we are in a fictionalized Europe, created on the backlot of MGM, where everyone is somehow American, and again we are centered on the battle of the sexes, in this case between bickering co-workers Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart. The obscure source for the film was Parfumery, a story written in 1937 by Hungarian playwright Miklos Laszlo, and once again adapted by Lubitsch's frequent collaborator Samson Raphaelson. Yet unlike the glamorous, exoticized locales of his musicals, the shop of Matuszek and Company is homely and familiar. The casting of Stewart, whose star was rising following the previous year's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, intentionally gives his Alfred Kralik an everyman quality, while Margaret Sullivan's clothing was both deliberately sun-faded and altered so as not to fit her correctly. The Shop Around the Corner is, then, in both its storyline and mise-en-scène, Lubitsch's most universal, everyday tale, and perhaps too his most autobiographical. The loving attention to detail of Matuszek and Company's store, as well as the warmth of the characters which populate it, was surely Lubitsch's personal nod to his father's tailoring shop in which he had worked in his youth. And if his work in the 1920s, though light in tone, was informed by a sense of an innocent Middle Europe that had been lost after the carnage of the Great War, then perhaps The Shop Around the Corner was a warning about the values which were under threat from the new war which was presently raging across the world. On its release, the film gained positive reviews and made a modest profit, but the influence of both it and that of its director have proved more significant and lasting. Remade as a musical in 1949 as In the Good Old Summertime, and later having its main plot device borrowed in 1998's You've Got Mail, it remains one of the great director's best known and best loved works, and an indirect influence on the likes of Capra's It's a Wonderful Life and Billy Wilder's The Apartment. As recently as this year, Wes Anderson, long a Lubitsch acolyte, paid direct homage to it in his The Grand Budapest Hotel, illustrating a longevity of influence which explains why, even when approaching one of his films for the first time, a trip to Lubitsch land feels like being in the company of a dear friend.